right, cool. Welcome everybody to the first UHND podcast in 10 or 11 years. Given all of us are holed up in our houses right now, we figured what better time to restart the UHND podcast. So while you are only looking at me on screen here, I actually have two names that most of you all will remember or recognize from the UHND boards or from our articles. So, and I will actually let them introduce themselves. Let them introduce themselves first. So, let's see, Greg, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Greg Flamand, staff writer. I'm at Greg2126 on Twitter if you follow me there. I've been looking forward to my site actually doing a podcast. I've been on, me and my friend, we have a USC Notre Dame football podcast, and I've been on One Foot Downs a bunch. So I'm glad our site, we're getting going. We're getting with the times. It's exciting time.
Exactly. Yeah, here we go. All it took was a global pandemic and being stuck inside for multiple days in a row with no end in sight to get us going. Let's see, JD, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Jack Daniels here. First time talking on the UHND podcast, like you said, in over 10 years, Frank. So this is a little bit of a blast from the past. I think it dwindled out towards the end of the Weiss era, and the kind of come down after that. We never got it kick-started again, but this is a nice reboot, as you said, and look forward to the conversations. I know we've been talking about some really cool concepts to keep these going for future episodes. So also looking forward to getting those going. But before we talk Notre Dame football, I just wanted to get to the more important topics. What beer did you end up grabbing, Frank?
Yes, I ended up grabbing something called, and this my little virtual background was blocking it, but it's called Chaos Emeralds Double IPA. I got it because I figured chaos was pretty fitting for our current times, but it is an 8% double IPA. It gets the job done. How about yourself?
So before I came to my workstation here, I ended up grabbing two 12-ounces. One is a 40th limited edition Sierra Nevada hoppy anniversary ale. It is very delicious. It is 6%. And then, so that's what I'm sipping on now. And I just figured, depending on how long this podcast goes, I have some backup. So this one, my backup will be a Stone FML double IPA. So Fear Movie Lions. It is an unfiltered double IPA, 8.5%
Nice.
alcohol. So
nice.
Yeah.
And Greg, I know you're going back on like baby duty right after we get done with this, so I don't know if you're partaking in the beer portion of our podcast, but
that was an incredible description of a beverage. I was just listening in awe about the whole thing. You know what? Actually, our neighbor, he indoctrinated me into the White Claw.
Okay.
It's been all the rage, and I've just not really partaken. And he brought one over to me yesterday, and I had one, so I've got another one here.
All right, nice.
Very exciting time. Yes.
Fun fact: at the Notre Dame USC game this year, I think Jeff rolled his eyes at me and Kyle quite a few times because after tailgating for multiple hours, I was like, I can't drink another IPA right now, or I'm not making it to this game. And then Kyle and I switched to White Claw, and I think it saved the day. But I'm sure that will get us some comments to the 17 people that end up watching this video later. But
yeah. I think you paid for your transportation.
Yeah.
I think you paid for the transportation and the the amount of White Claws you guys drank with the recycling that you might have been able to do.
Yeah, dude, those were good. I'm not gonna lie, especially if you're going all day. Like that was refreshing. But yeah, I don't plan on going that hard today. So the double IPA will hopefully do the job today. Also got a full stock upstairs of multiple IPAs for the next week or two. Just tried to buy as many variety packs as as the beer store had yesterday, but which was crazy because beer store here was pretty much the busiest place that I've been in a long time, which was a little disturbing. But anyway, let's talk some Notre Dame football. Now that we've gotten the important stuff out of the way. Crazy time for all sports in general right now. Certainly unprecedented, I think, for what anybody's used to dealing with. But when it comes to Notre Dame, obviously impacting the Irish just like it is every other college football program right now. So what I thought we'd maybe start with talking about, since right now we would be talking about all the players that were getting us excited, for 2020, and all the players that were making moves, this spring, is, who are the players that you're most, disappointed that we're not going to be able to, to see at least, as much as we had planned, whether or not spring, anything, happens to make up for these practices at some point, we don't know. But who would be, some of those players? And I'm going to just say, you can't say Kevin Austin up front, because I think we all are extremely excited to see what Kevin Austin could do, and what he would have, what he would have done all spring. But who are some of the players that you guys really wanted to watch this spring? Let's see if either one of you want to go first.
I'll just jump in.
Yeah.
It hurts me that you took away Kevin Austin, because he's
That's
like
too
a myth
obvious.
at this
You
point.
also can't say Kyle
he's
Hamilton.
Well, listen, I'm saying Kyle. You can't take Kyle from me. All right.
All right.
Our beloved, beautiful boy Kyle.
Yeah.
We're just going out there. I just want to see him play. It
Yeah.
has been so long,
Mhm.
and I miss seeing him. So, but yeah, Kevin Austin, and he's reached mythical status at this point. I mean, his exploits are just going to get greater and greater the less we get to see him. So, but just what I wanted to see was basically two things. I wanted to see the running backs, and I wanted to see the corners.
Mhm.
I feel like running back is pretty up in the air right now. Tony Jones is gone. Jafar, what's he gonna be? Was he gonna be kind of what we saw at the end of last season, where his role was very severely diminished from what we thought it was going to be at the beginning of the year?
Yeah.
And what are we going to see from Jameer Smith and Sebo? And we know we got Chris Tyree coming in. Like, where would he fit in? So I wanted to see a good amount of that, and then just the corners. We lost Troy Pride. Is Tariq Bracy going to be the type of guy that can line up against other teams' number one wide receiver? Can he hang with someone like Kevin Austin? Can he hang with Braden Lindsey, the transfer from Northwestern? Can he hang with those kind of guys? And then just like, what do we have in the early entries, like Ramon Henderson and Caleb Offord and those kind of guys? So that's basically what I wanted to see. And obviously now we don't get that.
Yeah.
It's a bummer.
Yeah. What about you? What about you, JD? Any players in particular? I have a few listed over here that I know I was looking forward to watching this spring.
I was as a position group, I was definitely leaning towards the wide receivers. Like, even if you tell me to leave out Kevin Austin, fine. Like, what is Keys going to bring to the table? What is Xavier Watts, Ben Skoranek? Is he able to come in? And it sounds like he's already done some nice things in terms of leadership and just physical capability, almost in the likes of the talented duo from 2005 in terms of big-bodied wide receivers who can go up and reliably get the ball. So obviously speaking of Stovall and Samardzija.
Yeah.
So as a position group, probably the wide receivers, maybe also the secondary a little bit. But if I had to name one guy, I was just looking over the spring roster, and the one name that stuck out to me in terms of an individual that it's like do or die time is Jafar Armstrong.
Yep.
This guy was supposed to be kind of our home run hitter out of the backfield. The last year we saw glimpses of it. What was it, 2 years ago, and before he got injured, and it's just what can this guy do? Can we get almost a Sean Crawford style performance out of him, to where when he is healthy, like this guy is so dynamic being on the field, and that's what I'm kind of hoping. I was kind of hoping to see in the spring, and it'll be interesting to see if he does get that shot again.
Yeah, I mean, Armstrong's an obvious one. I think you guys both nailed it. Greg, you actually wrote, I was at like, I want to say it was like 2 to 3 weeks ago, but honestly, like days are feeling like months right now. So it might have been longer
Yeah.
ago or shorter ago that you wrote about. Like, what position is Jafar's best position at this point? Like, is he just somebody that he is dynamic, but isn't built to be a running back full time, and we could find other ways to get him the ball. I think that we might have seen some of that experimenting this spring, and again, whether or not we end up seeing it at some point, who knows? But I mean, yeah, obviously, I would love to have seen him, stay healthy for a full spring and just see what he could do. You guys talked about the wide receivers already, but one, I mean, I wanted to see Lenzy this spring and see, we saw glimpses of him being that home run threat, at times, and we saw him, be truly dynamic with getting the ball and on the jet sweeps and end around type plays. But how is, our new offensive coordinator, which we haven't talked about yet, Tommy Reese, how is he going to find ways to get Lenzy the ball? And can Lenzy be a legit starting wide receiver, or is he going to, can he do the same Will Fuller type transformation where he went from a really fast guy one year to, being a guy who is an every down starting receiver. So he was one I was really looking forward to watching this spring. Another guy that has almost fallen off the map, and Notre Dame fans seem to have forgotten a little about, is Houston Griffith. I was really excited to see what he was going to do moving back to safety this year, because it always kind of seemed like his natural, position, and the Notre Dame tried to kind of force him into some roles just out of need in previous years. But now that he would be moving back to safety, both of those positions open. Obviously, Kyle Hamilton's going to lock down, have one of those positions locked down. But I was hoping to see, Griffith, step up and start to play like that top 100 overall, prospect that we saw, or that we saw coming out of high school. So he's one that,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that kind of reminds me back to Harrison Smith and all of the moving around that he did and was never able to get any solid traction. And then all of a sudden, boom, you put him in the right position, and now he's in one of the best safeties in the league right now, and one of the highest paid, and
Yeah.
has been an All-Pro. So I wonder if Griffith can get some of that magic as well.
I hope so. And speaking of safeties, while we're at the position, have you guys seen the pictures from like the 2 days or 3 days, however many it was, of spring practice that we actually got of Isaiah Pryor, and how ridiculously jacked that guy is for a college football player? I mean, when I saw some of the pictures, I was like, all right, you know what? Like, I know he didn't, he had his troubles at Ohio State somewhat, but I mean, he physically, like, you look at him and you go, okay, these are the kind of safeties that Bama has. These are the kind of safeties that Clemson has. And again, it's one of those where you're like, him not getting spring ball now, could be, or if he doesn't at all, it could be something that plays a role in terms of who ends up starting at at safety in come the fall. One other player that you guys didn't mention that I'm gonna throw out there is Ian Book, because I mean, honestly, we go as far as Ian Book takes us in 2020, and I'm really interested to see of the challenges and struggles that he had at times in 2019. We all have kind of now heard and read the rumors of the discontent amongst the coaching staff, and how much of that played a role in in Book's performance. And in 2020, are we going to see the Ian Book that we saw starting with that touchdown drive to end the Virginia Tech game, who went on a tear in the month of November and then carried that over to the bowl game? Or are we going to see the Ian Book that struggled a little bit when he faced some better defenses? And he's just one. Again, we go in as far as he takes us in 2020. What are you guys' thoughts on Book in general going into spring, going into the year?
What do you got? I'm curious what you guys feel about, the idea that he's kind of reached his ceiling. He is what he is.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder what you guys think about that, because I have kind of a view on where, like, that conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think he has, to be honest. I think there's still a level or two in him that that we haven't quite seen, and we we've seen glimpses of what he can be. I mean, I think there's another level that he, that he can still reach. Whether or not he does, I don't know. But I mean, I don't think that we've seen him peak, just yet. I don't know, JD. What about you?
Yeah, so I don't know if you guys remember, but Dan Orlovsky is an analyst for ESPN, and he called Notre Dame's bowl game against Iowa State. And then within a couple weeks after the bowl game, he also was on Pete Sampson's podcast. I believe it was the Shamrock, or if I'm not mistaken, or it might have also been the Irish Illustrated podcast. I can't remember which one of those two. But the Notre Dame guys interviewed Dan, and he talked a little bit about Ian Book and the relationship with Chip Long, and kind of Long's comments back last summer about he needs him to be the damn game changer or something along those lines.
Yeah.
And Orlovsky's comments, who's widely considered as one of the bright young analysts in the game, mentioned that, no, that's exactly the wrong step you should take with somebody like him. He's not Tua. He's not Trevor Lawrence. He does very well what his skills are meant to be utilized for, and you don't need him to be the damn game changer, as Chip Long said, but you need him to take his skills and do efficiently and precisely what we saw back in 2018. And so I'm on board that train. I don't think we need to raise Ian Book's ceiling much more. I think if we can get, if say his ceiling right now is at whatever, 95, say his PlayStation score is 95 out of 100. We don't need him to get to 98 or 99. We just need him to execute at 95 and not regress back down to 90, So that's kind of the analogy that I think Orlovsky was trying to communicate, and I've bought into that philosophy. I don't necessarily want to see a huge leap in Ian this year. I just want him to go back to doing what he was successful in 2018 and what we saw the last half of this year.
See, when I think about Ian, I don't think about like the idea of him being a playmaker and that sort of thing. You can be a playmaker from, within the confines of what his game is and what his physical ability is. He's not the biggest guy, he's not the fastest or whatever. He doesn't have the strongest arm, but I don't think that they're inhibiting him as far as like, people looked at Tommy Rees and it's like he has a lot of physical limitations. I don't think of Ian Book in the same way, but I think that where he can improve, what his biggest weaknesses were last year, were just understanding where the ball needed to go.
Yep.
And I think that we saw that in the second half of the season after the loss to Michigan, when, Brian Kelly came out and kind of said, we changed the way that we coached him. They gave him a lot of open-ended situations. It wasn't just a script where you're just kind of going through the motions. They actually challenged him a bit more in practice. And then we saw him, really improve as a player. And I think that, working with Tommy Rees, a guy that he seems to have a better relationship with, that can help that, when you have somebody who you're comfortable with, who is explaining things to you a lot more. It's one thing when it's the quarterback coach, it's another thing when it's the offensive coordinator as well. So I think that's what we can see from Ian next year, is just like having a greater knowledge of like, this is why we're doing this. We're running this play. This is where the ball needs to go, understanding matchups. Because I feel like that's the biggest thing about being quarterback, is you just know where the ball is supposed to be all the time. When you look at a guy like Joe Burrow, 1 year, 2 seasons ago, he's a 58% passer. Last year, he's like 75%, and he's the engineer of the greatest offense in college football history. And I think a big part of that is just like he understands where the ball needs to go. He understands the matchups and that sort of thing. Unfortunately, there's a lot of bad statistics out there about, what it's like when a quarterback loses a good amount of the receiving production from the season before.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Ian's lost Chase and he lost Komet. And, those are basically his top two targets.
Yeah.
Losing the spring as well and working with someone like Kevin Austin and Braden Lindsay and Lawrence Keys, and those guys are going to be the frontline players. You have a new player in Ben Skoranek. You want to build a rapport with him. That's getting lost. And every school is going through that, right? No one's getting spring practice, but it'd be a lot easier of a transition if Ian had Chase or people of that experience. So that's kind of how I feel about Ian. It's just like I feel like it's there. I'm a little bit worried about the loss of time because he needs to work with these guys.
Yeah, man, and kind of go back to what you said, JD, about the 95 or whatever his rating is. Yeah, I don't think we need him to raise that at all. I think we just need to see. I think his next level that he can reach is consistency in his execution, and doing what we saw against against Duke, against Stanford, against Iowa State, seeing that again and again and again, and seeing it against the better teams. Because now he's going to come into the season knowing that against Georgia, against Michigan last year, against Clemson in the Cotton Bowl, he didn't have his best games. There's no hiding that, and I mean he's going to carry that in to next year. And will we see him be a different quarterback against Wisconsin? Will we see him be a different quarterback against Clemson? When they come into South Bend in November, again, assuming the college football season isn't impacted by the current situation outside of sports, and losing the practice is something potentially, again, losing all these practices is something that's going to, I think, unfortunately hurt his development and the offenses as a whole, especially with having a brand new offensive coordinator. Now, granted, the offense isn't going to change drastically. It's not like we're going from the triple option to going to what did Davey call it when we opened the 97 season in a 5 wide? He had a name for that offense. Now it's escaping me. But it's not that. It's not trying to go so drastic, from one system to another that losing practice time, will be totally detrimental. But I do think that there will be, we're going to miss out on kind of the full Reese effect, essentially, with a lot of the lost time, which actually, brings us to kind of the next point that we had listed is what we wanted to talk about is, outside of players you were looking to see, well, so let's say, again, all of the practices that are being lost right now are gone forever, and the NCAA doesn't do something to say, extend fall camp or something, along those lines to allow for some of this to be made up. What do you see as more of like the long-term, impact of losing, of losing this practice time come fall, and after?
I mean, there's going to be. Oh, you want to go ahead, Jeff?
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say, like, I feel like there's going to be a rash of injuries. I think there's going to be, people not in the best shape. I mean, they're losing time, just like, the 15 practices, just from the standpoint of just participating in them. You are gaining conditioning. You are gaining strength just by being out there. They're not around Matt Balis. They're not, they're not building any sort of team camaraderie. There's no sort of, I have no like reference point to anything like this. It was a JD. You went to Modern Day, right?
That's correct.
Right. So, and you were on the football team, right?
Yep.
Okay. So for people listening, Modern Day is at least one of the top 10, definitely top 15 high school programs in the nation. So you guys never went this amount of time not together, I assume. Because our high school, we were, we had a little kind of a spring practice, but then once school ended in June, We were working out together every day. We were doing 7-on-7. We were doing conditioning. I mean, we were always together. And that's just, my high school program. And I'm sure modern day was similar, if probably a lot more so. And now we're talking about major Division I athletics. I mean, there is just like, I don't think that people realize like what we're used to seeing on the field in the fall. It could be not, I want to say completely different, but it's not going to be like, like things like the snap count and the silent count and that sort of thing. Like, there's going to be a ton of sloppiness. Like
we had enough problems with that last year when there was spring practice.
We had problems with that when everything was normal, and now it's like we don't know when they're going to get together again, right? I mean, because we assume, like maybe by August or July, right? Well, they're used to have been together for months. And it's like little things that they're not working on, and it's just like I don't know really what to expect, but it's I feel like it has a chance to be kind of like shocking.
Yeah. So back to your analogy about high school, like if they do get back and everybody, they start grinding that wheel again by sometime in the summer, I think you'll see something similar to high school sports, where especially football, like summer football, where we had 2 days. So I could envision that the NCAA will obviously accommodate and make some adjustments to their rules about the number of practices and when you can do it and everything. And so I would imagine that it will look something like increased number of practices allowed. You will be allowed to have 2 days. That will probably look like some type of education or film study in the mornings with potential walkthroughs without pads. So just shorts and helmets or something like that, and then maybe like a padded practice in the afternoon. So I think you'll probably see that a little bit more often. I guess in the grand scheme of things, I'm actually a little bit more bearish on the whole college football season in general. I would not be surprised if we don't get a college football season, and if we do, it's minimized, broken down by several games. I don't think the true impact of everything that's happening right now has come to fruition. I don't think people necessarily realize it. I think there still might be a lot more to drop. And obviously we're in March and we're almost in April, and this is going to take a while. And, unfortunately, I just think that, speaking for myself, I was planning on, I think it was 4 games this year. So I was planning on going back to Dublin for the Navy game. Whether or not they're back to practice by July or August, I don't think they're going to be playing in Dublin. I think that's going to come back home and maybe played at actually in Annapolis. I wouldn't be surprised if it was played in Annapolis. But then I was trying to hit the Wisconsin game and then the Clemson game at Notre Dame. So I guess it's 3. But yeah, I'm honestly at this point not planning on going to any games, and I'd be surprised if they even play most of them this season. And that's not even to mention the 4 weddings that I have friends and family supposed to have here in 2020. One coming up next month, one in May, one in August, and one in November. And I think we're both pretty close to that April one, Frank.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think that one in that one in May, we're both going. Well, we were both invited to. I don't think anyone, unfortunately. I think that's probably the one. Yeah, that's the most at risk. I mean, I agree that I think I don't think it's a given that that everything's just gonna pick back up. Right away and go into it. Let's say in terms of not missing or not delaying starts of the seasons and things like that. But I mean, I think let's say it does. Let's say we're things clear up pretty not clear up, but they they get better and in relatively short order. And relative is a very relative term right now. So, but let's say by July, they are able to practice again. Yeah, is this a situation where, and we hear Brian Kelly talk about his however many years of, I forget, like he mentions it all the time. I should know off the top of my head however many years he's been.
31 years or something like that.
Exactly. Like, but is this a time where, he's been, I mean, now granted, no coach has gone through this. Like, there is not a single head coach that's gone through this, but is a coach who has been around for a long time, who has tried a lot of different things, who has, done different practice schedules. Is it a time where maybe that comes into play versus maybe, somebody like a Ryan Day, who's a very relatively, young coach that doesn't have as much experience to draw off of. That's something maybe, again, that could be pie in the sky thinking for me of ways in which this won't impact, Notre Dame as much. But I mean, that was one thought I had, at least in
I,
terms of,
I
of
think,
minimizing.
yeah, I think across all programs, you're just going to have so much experience, both young and experienced, that th- nobody's going to have an advantage, I don't think, in terms of, leveraging Brian Kelly's 31 years
Yeah,
versus Ryan Day's one. So
yeah,
I don't think there's much of an advantage there. I think there's just too many resources and there's too much money to miss something that another program might be doing. I forgot to mention during kind of the last thing I was saying is one thing I think and kind of feeding off of what Greg was saying. One thing I think you'll see is or right now that I would be surprised if they weren't doing are similar to what we're doing, like either WebEx or
oh yeah,
Zoom style conference calls and screen sharing. So I could imagine Tommy Reese is getting together with some of the offensive skill guys and either going over uh, film together or having study sessions or things like that. Even if it wasn't coach led, uh, Ian Book has to be like organizing the guys and having calls and chats and FaceTime and all that stuff with them. And so that's the other thing about the missed workouts going that they're missing right now and throughout the spring is and also feeding off of what Greg said earlier. It's more of a disadvantage to the younger guys than to the older guys. The older guys have already been in the program. They've already got up to speed on Bayless's strength program over the last couple of years. Those are the guys we shouldn't necessarily worry about. It's that younger, newer talent and depth that is not developing right now that
yeah.
it will be concerning coming into the fall and even into next, 2021 next
Yeah.
year. You lose all this build-up time. So.
Yeah, but I mean, even the guys who have gone through, the program, though. I mean, most places, at least I know around me, gyms are closed. They're not at school. They're not, so they're, who knows what kind of, equipment that they have access to in terms of being able to, I'm sure most of these guys don't have full on, gyms in their, in their homes, in their home basements, like similar to what they'd have at or have access to if they were on campus. So I think there's some validity to Greg's concern there of like who knows what kind of shape some of these some of them are gonna come back to school, and they don't have access to the training table every day, and access to a curated meal plan that is aimed at maximizing performance. People around the country are having a hard time getting access to certain foods because grocery stores are sold out of a lot of things everywhere. So who knows what kind of diets all of them are going to be living on off of the next for however long. So I think, I mean, maybe this is the case though too, where again having somebody like Matt Bayless, who we've seen get results in a relatively short period of time. That first off season, the results that we saw in a lot of the athletes were pretty tremendous. Maybe having somebody like him at a time right now who can assess, when they all come back, what effects this has had on their their conditioning, and their strength and all of their the different testing numbers, to be able to build some sort of, I don't know, condensed program that's aimed at combating, the all likelihood that a bunch of 18 to 22-year-olds are stuck in a house and, God knows, with access to, this junk food and things like that, that maybe they wouldn't necessarily, be eating as much if they were, on campus where they have, the spreads that we see pictures of every time, the victory meals that we see. So we know they have access to pretty damn good meals, when they're on campus. But I mean, that's another factor, I think, that is one of those things that we'll see what kind of long-term, long-term impact this has on not just Notre Dame, because this is going to be every program. So I mean, I don't know. It's going to be pretty interesting to see, and maybe it's a situation where programs that run simpler defenses, simpler offenses are going to have somewhat of an advantage this fall, because they're not as predicated on all the practice time and all the execution and needing all of all of that time together. So I mean, thinking about Notre Dame's schedule, actually, that makes me, the first thing I just thought of as I said that was Wisconsin, and their offense of, we're going to line up, we're going to run the ball on you. I mean, maybe that's more of a concern than previously it was, if that's a long-term impact.
Yeah, I think that probably applies more to learning the various wrinkles of Tommy Rees's offense that he has never had a chance to install up until now. I'm probably less concerned with Clark Lee's defense, just because of the kind of aura that he has developed over the past several years in terms of his teaching style and the ease of the team learning his defense and all the various adjustments, and just the ability to learn from a skilled person-to-person teacher as Clark Lee.
Sure. I mean,
just for a second, this just popped in my mind right now. Like, the injured guys, like they would normally be getting, top flight, Division I medical recovery,
Yep.
just working with athletic trainers and that sort of thing. Like, just thinking of Shane Simon and Jack Lamb.
Yep.
And just like all the people who are hurt right now, like they're not getting that. Like, they're at home. Like, it just, man, like, not good.
No, I mean, I think we're just thinking. I mean, imagine all the things we're not thinking of too. That
Right.
that they don't have the full on access to right now. But even on defense, I mean, yeah, I would agree with you, Jeff, that that Clark Lee, the defensive side of the ball is probably less of a concern, because Lee's been here, in place for a few years. They know the core defense, but even there, we're replacing a lot of starters on on defense. When you think Gilman, Elliott, Pride, Bilal, Aquara, Khalid Kareem. I don't think I mean, so I mean, yeah, I mean, we're replacing a good portion, of that defense. And yeah, I mean, some of those guys could have really. I mean, obviously, this goes across, all of college football, but I mean, yeah, that's a lot to replace. And thinking of this out loud too is like, I mean, are the teams that return the most starters from 19 to 20, are they going to be the ones that that have less of an impact on them, or because they have all that returning experience, and if they again miss practice, even if practice time is made up and it's condensed, I think there's still something to it happening now. Those players taking everything that they go through the spring, going through, the rest of the off season, working together, and then coming back in the summer and kind of building off of what they learned in spring, as opposed to like it all happening, it all happening at once. So I mean, yeah, I think there's a lot of, it's gonna be interesting in general, just what happens with not just college football, but all of sports. And I mean, I've seen even some, like, I don't watch a ton of hockey, but I mean, I do watch the Flyers from time to time, and of course this is the first year that the Flyers are really good in like 6-7 years, and now hockey is not, it's like all sports up in question. But I've seen some proposals for them where they're thinking, we get back to playing hockey in July and the season's going to go into September. So then you guys start thinking about like how the networks are going to handle all of this, influx of games if and when they happen, and what happens with somebody like an ESPN that's got an NBA contract if the NBA games are bleeding into the fall, and how they juggle that, and what role the networks are going to have as they're talking to college football about, does this impact games, games come September or August. So a lot, I think, on from that angle. The one area we haven't quite touched on yet, which unfortunately has already started, to impact Notre Dame, and not necessarily that it's related to the current situation at all, but is on the recruiting trail. And it's, even though that we're now in a dead period from the NCAA, and that recruiting, in person and in person and on campus visits are off limits right now. Notre Dame did suffer. I mean, what I was trying to think of a bigger decommitment than that of Deion Colsey, that Notre Dame suffered at the end of last week, and I couldn't remember the last one that when it happened, I had that much of a, oh man, really him? Because I mean, he was, you're looking top 100 overall recruit at wide receiver, position that Notre Dame. I mean, I obviously we've produced some really good receivers, but last year when Jordan Johnson signed, he was the highest rated receiver since Michael Floyd, and then Michael Floyd signed over a decade ago. So I mean, I think in terms of the recruiting impact, I think there's a lot to what's going on right now that's going to hurt Notre Dame in the long term, and that's because, I mean, past weekend was supposed to be the bonanza, recruiting weekend for Notre Dame. They were going to have all those recruits on campus who now are not there,
It was
and
supposed to be today, right?
yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was going to be, like it was the big spring blowout, to get, and there was going to be, elite prospect after elite prospect on campus this weekend. Obviously that didn't happen. And the whole spring visits in general was a topic that was supposed to help Notre Dame football, or Notre Dame recruiting. When it was approved a couple of years ago, because trying to get recruits out to to South Bend, Indiana, from certain parts of the country to juggle it around high school football games isn't necessarily the easiest. And from Notre Dame's perspective, when you get them there in October and November, who knows what the weather is going to to be like. So that was always a factor. So these spring visits were supposed to be something that really helped Notre Dame, and I think we saw Notre Dame over the last couple of years, since this has been implemented, really push for those earlier visits and get players on campus, for official visits in the spring. And now that is gone. And now how is that going to impact this class of 2021, which looked, 3 months ago on paper, the way this thing had started and the way it was trending was looking like, okay, this will rival for possibly Brian Kelly's best recruiting class. And now, I mean, to me, I think there are some big questions around that now, that recruiting across the country is kind of, everybody's momentum is kind of stopped right now. But once it is able to pick back up, like, can Notre Dame fully recover, and can they they continue the momentum that they had built? I have questions now of whether or not they'll be able to, and it's unfortunate, but I don't know. What are you guys' thoughts on how this impacts Notre Dame on the recruiting trail?
Yeah, so I don't, as you know, Frank, I don't follow recruiting too much, but this is where, kind of going back to your point earlier about Brian Kelly and his 31 years of head coach experience, this is where that might be an advantage of knowing what levers to pull and how to adjust and not lose too much momentum, being able to kind of gather that momentum and proceed forward. I think my biggest concern or question is psychologically. Is there a psychological element to recruits to stay closer to home than Notre Dame would like, because they are such a national, they have such a national recruiting base? And so that's my biggest concern, is pairing Notre Dame's national recruiting base with a new psychological impact of young people and staying, closer to home.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's dead on. And whether or not, I mean, again, we won't know that for sure, but I mean, I think that's a very logical a very logical observation to make based on what what everybody's experiencing right now. Um, and yeah, I mean you're right. Notre Dame doesn't really. I mean, there's not a huge recruiting hotbed near Notre Dame geographically that Notre Dame really excels in. When there's elite prospects in Indiana, Notre Dame does a good job of making sure they stay. They stay in state and go to Notre Dame. Chicagoland area has been pretty good to Notre Dame over the years as well. Notre Dame's dipped into Ohio. I think Notre Dame's dipped into Ohio pretty well, all things considered, given what Ohio State has built. But outside of that, like Michigan occasionally, as well. But I mean, it's not Georgia, it's not Florida, it's not those areas. It's not Texas or California. And again, like who knows what restrictions there's going to be on travel for how long and when visits are going to be able to take place. So, I mean, there's going to be, let's say, recruiting visits can start up, but there's just still going to be additional restrictions on travel, in terms of flights. And there's going to be recruits who are going to be able to get in a car and go to certain schools to visit them, but they're not going to be able to necessarily see, to see Notre Dame. But I don't know what.
One of the good things I think, just from the way the previous class, like the 2019 class, was wrapped up last August.
Yep.
So that's obviously not going to be the case this year. But
No.
I think that the good news from that is they had a lot of time to build relationships with the current class to where they're like way ahead of the game. So they don't need to necessarily start, like, they're not in the process of building relationships. They're in the process of cementing relationships.
No.
So at least they are at that kind of point where it's like the last thing that some of these guys need is a visit. Unfortunately, that timeline is up in the air.
Yep.
And that makes it difficult. But as far as replacing Colsey, I'm, the last like month or so, I haven't followed recruiting as much as I normally would, just because, there's a lot of other things going on. But
Yeah,
I don't know that there's anyone that they're even looking at that would compare to him.
Mm-hmm.
I could probably just pull it up right now, but
I wrote an article this morning about this, Greg. It's live on UHND.
I'm sorry, Frank. Don't yell at me.
I mean, I think there's a couple names out there. There's a couple guys that Notre Dame was already trying to add. Adding to the class, a guy like like a Dante Thornton is one that comes to mind. Because he's 6'4", he's a top. I think he's 52 overall on Rivals. This is his exact ranking. So he's a guy that obviously if you can replace Colsey with him, okay, that's kind of a 1-to-1. But I mean, they were already trying to add him to the class. So
he's a January commitment too, so there's a lot of time.
Exactly, which I think that helps Notre Dame. A lot in terms of he's not looking to make a quick decision. But so I mean I think he's a guy that you get him, awesome. That helps mitigate the loss. But they were already trying to add him to give them 3 elite receivers. So it's still kind of a net loss because you could have had all 3. And I think one thing that I wrote this too is that if you see Colsey's remarks and some of the things that he said is that he hasn't eliminated Notre Dame. Notre Dame is still a school that he's strongly considering, and he just he didn't feel right in terms of he wasn't committed, so he told the coaching staff that. And actually I wrote in the article this morning is that you have to respect that a little bit, because how many times do you see one of these these recruits who they commit somewhere and they say, I'm committed, but I'm taking all 5 of my visits. And we all hear that and we all go, okay, well, is that really a commitment? If you're going to take all 5 of your visits, you're not really committed. So part of me looks at that and goes like, give the kid credit for saying, what, I knew that, I wasn't fully committed anymore and I still am considering you, but instead of, playing the charade of saying, I'm committed, but I'm looking elsewhere, I'm going to just
Yeah.
be upfront and tell you. And now, you guys go do what you need to do because I'm going to do what I need to do. And I thought that was, it's different, I think, than some of the other maybe decommitments and some of the other stories that we hear. But I mean, I think there's still a chance that, that he ends up ultimately at Notre Dame. When he committed to Notre Dame, he said, Notre Dame was his dream school. So I mean, I don't know. I mean, that was just 6 months ago. So I mean, I think it's on Brian Kelly, Tommy Rees, Delvon Alexander. I think it's on those three, specifically to remind him of why he made that commitment. Why he made that commitment in the in the first place. And I think this is one where Brian Kelly, he got some criticism last recruiting cycle for some of the elite recruits who had said they didn't quite hear from him. I think this is one where, especially given again current state of what we're dealing with recruiting, is he needs to be front and center on that recruiting and do everything that he can to try to get him back in the fold. Because you get him back in the fold, you add somebody like Thornton, and now all of a sudden we're talking about one of the best wide receiver classes, in the country. But
I mean, they need Shipley bad.
oh my God, yes. Which I mean, he was supposed to be on campus visiting visiting this month. So I mean, you get him, and again the class looks pretty good. But I mean, if you were to ask me like a month ago, how did you feel about this recruiting class, I was all in on this being probably the best class of the Brian Kelly era. Now I think it's who knows. There's so many ways that it could go. Jeff, you brought up a great point of, is there now a psychological factor of of wanting to stay close to home. Are there other factors that we're not thinking of yet that maybe impact that help Notre Dame after something like this? Notre Dame's got name recognition, you're on TV, all of those, all of the things that we know, the kind of the normal ones of, do those now maybe play a little bit better? Because if you have a shortened recruiting cycle, and maybe you don't get to have as much contact with a with a recruit as you would have, maybe that helps, for players that they've already got on campus. Actually, and Greg, to your point, is we had the 2020 class wrapped up pretty quick, so they had a ton of juniors on campus last year. So now all of those all of those players have seen, have at least seen Notre Dame. They've experienced it. Maybe if they don't get to take, say, an official visit, it's not the end of the world, and Notre Dame could still still do pretty well on some of those some of those recruits. And who knows, does the NCAA say now, like, again, because we're in unprecedented times, does the NCAA say, look, we realize how much time was lost on unofficial visits and and all the visits that you could have taken in the spring, we're going to allow 6 official visits, in the fall, or 7 official visits or something, like we just don't know if the NCAA will, how they're going to respond. Given everything the NCAA has done in the last, I don't know, 10 or so years, I don't think we should expect them to necessarily respond super logically.
Yeah.
But I mean, one would hope that they would do something, that does help the the student athlete out in terms of all that has been and will be lost in terms of not just recruiting, but the practice time, the practice time as well. All right. Well, those
Crazy
are the
times.
yeah, exactly crazy times. How's the beer holding up for you, Jeff?
About a quarter left of the second one.
Whoa, damn. Okay, I'm slow. I mean, I got a tiny little bit of the first one. It is a 16 ouncer though, so I'm just gonna throw that out there. But and it's also, I was gonna even say it's still a little bit early, but it's even earlier for you guys than it is for me right now. But yeah, outside of how this is impacting Notre Dame football, I will say, how is this impacting your current consumption of alcohol? Because I know what it's doing for mine, but I know you guys are, you both have children. I don't. At least, so I know what it's doing to mine, but is it increasing or decreasing, your ability to have a beer from time to time?
I'm status quo. It's normal for me. I try
Yeah.
not to drink too much, just because it, once I open one, it's kind of like I just keep going. I don't want to stop. It's like I'm not gonna waste it. I'm not like
Yeah.
I'm gonna have like one drink or something like that. Like if like we're kind of wine people anyway. Like if we
Yeah.
open a bottle, we're opening a bottle,
Well,
and
yeah,
so
you
we're
finish
just
it.
gonna go.
That's just
Yeah.
responsible.
Yeah. So um so that's kind of where we're at. So we try to. But plus, like we want to save it up too, because we don't know how long this is going to be the case, right? We might have to ration.
Yeah. Well, liquor stores here are still liquor stores here are still considered essential business and allowed to stay open. That's what we've learned, because they're all still open and they're all still allowed to deliver, which is, I don't know, that says that there's something to be said about that. But what about you, Jeff?
Yeah, same here, status quo.
Oh man, okay. See, for me, it's been like the exact opposite. It's normally like during the week, I'm pretty good at like not drinking unless there's like a work happy hour or something like that. But like I've started working from home for my day job. Uh, it was the Wednesday. It was all last week, and there was the Wednesday before. So like going on my second week of working from home, and it is just we've gone through some booze, in the last in the last few days. I've done a pretty good job of still getting out and, going for some runs. But at this point, it's just out of guilt because I'm like, okay, you didn't need to drink last night. It was Wednesday, but or whatever day it was. But yeah, we've got quite the stockpile though here, to hopefully last us until things start to get back to normal. All right. I think we've been chatting a while. We've covered everything we wanted to talk about. Any parting shots, gentlemen? I was gonna leave our ideas for future podcasts. Still a little. I wasn't gonna let the cat out of the bag out of those, so that we could start recording some of our additional ideas before we post them. But any parting shots?
Just to everybody, like just hang in there. We're gonna try. The reason we're doing this, I think, partly because we need something to do.
Yeah.
That's not, I don't, Jeff. I got 3 kids. I don't know about Jeff, but it's just trying to do something different and just like give people, what we got coming. It's like it's not really has to do with this team or anything. It's just something lighthearted to think about. Just get your mind off things, that
Yeah.
we don't have to reference what's going on. It's just like think about times when games are actually being played.
Well said.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think for me is my life pretty much revolves around college football, and I guess after that I watch a little bit of NFL, but don't necessarily have any one particular team. I am an occasional baseball fan. I guess you can call me fair weather when my team is good, and when they're not, then I'll still pay attention, but just not as much. And I think one of the things that this might be turning me into is just a little bit more appreciative of other leagues. I'm not much of a college basketball fan, not much of an NBA fan. I do like watching hockey and will occasionally take in some racing, auto racing. But now just to appreciate all the other leagues that when they're on, that maybe I should watch it a little bit more and not take those for granted.
Yeah, Jeff, you definitely watch a lot of racing to the point that driving this was 2015, we were driving from Charlottesville after watching Will Fuller rip the hearts out of UVA fans. We were driving on our way down south, actually on a little bit of a road trip, and JD had us listening to the NASCAR race on the radio. I was like, I didn't know that this was even. I didn't know they put it on the radio. But we listened to it in the car. But so that was a fun little reminder for me. But Yeah, I
Yeah, I
think.
get. Just one note on that on NASCAR, and they actually just had a race today that was aired on Fox Sports One,
Yeah.
where it's called iRacing, and it's essentially computerized or video game racing, and it was a mixture of real life NASCAR drivers along with just average Joes who
Sure.
take up iRacing on whatever the platforms that they use. I think it's computer based platforms,
Yeah.
but they have pretty uh, complicated rigs that they sit in and force feedback steering wheels and foot pedals and everything. And it just got me thinking, man, if this was back in the mid 2000s, then we could have had some NCAA football on
That's true.
PlayStation broadcast on ESPN.
That might still happen. Esports might still blow up as a result of all this. And I heard about the video game race because I'm on a group chat with a couple of friends who, let's just say we're very big fans of the FanDuel app and being able to bet on sports, and we've all been kind of missing it over the last 10 days or so, or 11 days, however many it's been since we've had a live sporting event. And one of my friend's first reactions was, "You think we're gonna be able to bet on this at some point?" So, so but yeah, all right. I think, like I said, I think we've covered off on everything. We hope you all enjoyed this. We'll post it up on YouTube. We'll post it on the website, and if you do enjoy it, let us know in the comments. We'll keep doing them. I mean, at least during the current situation. But I mean, hey, if you guys really like them, we'll keep doing them into the season, and look for ways to improve them other than my virtual background here of Notre Dame Stadium with the UHND logo in the corner there. But hey, we hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for listening, and check in next time.